I've always prided myself on being observant. It's a trait that served me well. 20 years as a structural engineer, spotting hairline cracks in concrete before they spiderweb into disaster. My wife, Emily, used to tease me about it, calling me her human microscope. She'd laugh, her auburn hair catching the light, and I'd feel like the luckiest man alive. We'd been married 15 years, a solid foundation, or so I thought. Our home in Portland was a testament to that. Clean lines, warm wood, a life we'd built together. Our daughter, Lily, was 12, obsessed with astronomy, always dragging me outside to stargaze. Life was good, predictable even, but then something shifted. It wasn't a crack I could see, not at first. It was a feeling, a subtle dissonance like a beam slightly off plumb. Emily started lingering at her pottery studio longer than usual. She'd come home with clay-dusted jeans, her hands rough from the wheel, and a distracted smile. "Just lost track of time," she'd say, brushing it off. I didn't press her. She'd always loved her art, and I respected her space. Maybe I respected it too much. Then there were the little things. Her phone, once carelessly left on the counter, now stayed glued to her hand. She'd tilt the screen away when I walked by, her fingers tapping out messages with an urgency I didn't recognize. I'd ask who she was texting, and she'd mumble, "Just a friend from the studio," before changing the subject. Her laugh, once so open, felt guarded. I told myself it was nothing. People change. Marriages ebb and flow. But the engineer in me couldn't ignore the load-bearing walls of our life starting to bow. One night, Lily was at a sleepover, and Emily came home late again. I was in the kitchen, nursing a beer, when she walked in. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright in a way I hadn't seen in months. She smelled faintly of lavender, not her usual scent. "Good session?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She nodded, too quickly, and poured herself a glass of water. "Yeah, really productive," she said, avoiding my gaze. I watched her sip, her throat moving, and felt a cold weight settle in my chest. That night, she slept with her back to me, the space between us wider than the bed itself. The next week, I decided to surprise her. It was impulsive, unlike me. I left work early, picked up her favorite chai latte, and drove to the pottery studio. The place was a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and soft lighting, filled with the earthy smell of wet clay. I'd been there before, but this time felt different. The air hummed with something I couldn't name. Emily wasn't at her usual wheel. I scanned the room, students shaping vases, an instructor wiping her hands on an apron. No Emily. I was about to leave when I heard her laugh, sharp and bright, coming from a back room. My stomach tightened. I followed the sound, chai still warm in my hand, and stopped at a cracked door. Through the gap, I saw her. She was leaning against a table, her hair loose, her body relaxed in a way it hadn't been at home. And there was someone else, a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an easy grin. He held a lump of clay, molding it with his hands while she watched, her eyes locked on him. "You're hopeless?" she said, giggling, and he stepped closer, brushing her arm with his fingers. It wasn't the touch of a stranger. It was familiar, intimate. My grip on the cup tightened, the lid popping off, spilling chai down my wrist. I stepped back, heart hammering, and left before they saw me. Driving home, my mind raced. Who was he? How long had this been going on? The image of her smile, directed at him, burned behind my eyes. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. Instead, I sat in my workshop, staring at blueprints, trying to calculate the weight of what I'd seen. Engineers solve problems. I'd solve this. But first, I needed proof. I became a detective in my own life. It was methodical, like designing a bridge, gather data, test hypotheses, predict outcomes. I started small. Her phone was locked now, a new passcode I didn't know, but she wasn't as careful as she thought. One morning, while she showered, I checked her laptop. She'd left it open on the kitchen table, a rookie mistake. I scrolled through her emails, expecting nothing, until I found a thread buried in her spam folder. "Missed you last night," it read, from an address I didn't recognize. clayhands22@gmail.com. The name hit me like a punch. Her replies were short but damning. Me too. Thursday. My hands shook as I scrolled further. They'd been meeting for months, late nights at the studio, a few weekend retreats, she told me were for an art collective. Lies, all of it. Then I found the photos. Attached to one email was a snapshot. Emily and this man, his arm around her, both of them laughing in front of a kiln. Her head rested on his shoulder, her eyes half closed in contentment. I stared at it until my vision blurred, the room tilting around me. I copied the files to a USB drive and wiped my tracks, my engineer's precision kicking in even as my heart fractured. That night, she came home humming. "Good day?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Great day," she said, kissing my cheek absent-mindedly. I smelled lavender again, faint but unmistakable. I nodded, forcing a smile, and watched her move through our house like nothing had changed. But everything had. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man with a plan. I needed to know more about him. His email gave me a start, clayhands22. A quick search on my laptop pulled up an Instagram account. Marcus Reed, ceramicist, 38, single. His feed was full of pots and sculptures, but there were glimpses of his life. A dog, a cabin in the woods, and then, buried in the story's archive, a video. Emily's voice, unmistakable, saying, "You're ridiculous," as he spun clay into a lopsided bowl. The date was 3 months ago, but it was what came next that broke me. A friend of his had tagged him in a post, a blurry photo from a bar. Marcus and Emily, pressed close, her hand on his chest, his lips brushing her ear. The caption, "Caught these two lovebirds last night." Lovebirds. The word clawed at me. I dug deeper, cross-referencing dates. Every time she'd stayed late or visited a friend, Marcus had posted something, a cryptic quote, a photo of clay-covered hands, a sunset that matched her Instagram stories. Then I found the real twist. Marcus wasn't just some artist. He was married. His wife, Claire, was a florist, often away at trade shows. Emily wasn't just betraying me. She was part of his betrayal too. The hypocrisy of it, the layers of deceit, made my blood boil. I pictured them laughing about it, smug in their shared secret, while Claire and I sat in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my workshop sketching not buildings but a reckoning. Revenge wasn't enough. It had to be precise, devastating, a collapse they couldn't rebuild from. I'd use their own game against them, expose the fault lines they'd ignored. But first, I had to see it through, watch them together one last time. I followed her the next Thursday. She told me she was meeting a client, but I knew better. I parked a block from the studio, my truck blending into the dusk, and waited. She arrived first, her silhouette moving through the glass doors. Then Marcus pulled up, his Jeep crunching gravel. They didn't waste time. Within minutes, they were in that back room again, the blinds half drawn. I crept closer, staying low, and peered through a gap. They were tangled together, hands moving with a hunger that made my stomach lurch. But it wasn't just physical. There was a tenderness there, her fingers tracing his jaw, his murmured words making her smile. It was worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't a fling. It was love, or their twisted version of it. I didn't stay long. I had what I needed. Back home, I poured a whiskey and sat in the dark, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. The betrayal wasn't standard, not some cheap affair. It was a double-edged blade, cutting through 2 marriages, built on lies they fed each other. Tomorrow I'd start building my revenge. It wouldn't be loud or messy. It'd be cold, calculated, and crueler than they could fathom. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The fog of hurt had burned off, leaving a sharp-edged resolve. Engineers don't just fix things. They design solutions, anticipate stress points, ensure stability. Emily and Marcus had built their little world on shaky ground, and I'd be the one to bring it down. Not with fists or shouting, that was too crude. My revenge would be a structure of its own, elegant in its precision, devastating in its collapse. I started with Claire, Marcus's wife. If Emily could play in the shadows, so could I. A quick search online found her florist shop, Petals by Claire, 30 miles east in Salem. Her website was all pastel cheer. Bouquets for weddings, sympathy arrangements, a smiling photo of her with a sunflower tucked behind her ear. She looked kind, oblivious, a mirror of the man I'd been months ago. I drafted an email from a burner account, posing as a potential client. Interested in a large order for an event. Can we meet? She replied within hours, cheerful and accommodating. Step 1 was in motion. At home, I kept up the facade. Emily breezed through her routine. Coffee, a kiss on my cheek, a vague promise to be home by dinner. I smiled, nodded, asked about her day. She didn't notice the shift in me, the way my eyes tracked her now, cataloging every lie. That night, I dug deeper into Marcus. His social media was a goldmine. Posts about inspiration that lined up with Emily's absences. A smugness in his captions that made my jaw clench. I saved everything, building a dossier, a load-bearing beam for what was to come. Lily came home from school, chattering about constellations. I listened, helped her with a science project, and felt a pang. She deserved better than this fractured family. That fueled me more. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about dismantling their illusion before it touched her too. I drove to Salem on Saturday, telling Emily I had a site inspection. Claire's shop was quaint, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, the air thick with the scent of roses and eucalyptus. She greeted me warmly, her blonde hair pulled back, her hands dusted with pollen. "You must be James," she said, using the alias I'd given. I nodded, shaking her hand, and launched into a fabricated story about a corporate retreat needing floral centerpieces. She listened, scribbling notes, her enthusiasm genuine. Halfway through, I steered the conversation. "Your husband's an artist, right? I think I've seen his work." Her face lit up. "Marcus? Yeah, he's a potter. Talented, but he's been so busy lately. Studio time, you know?" I smiled thinly. "Must be hard, him being away so much." She shrugged, a flicker of unease crossing her features. "Sometimes, but he loves it." I didn't push further. I planted the seed. Before I left, I handed her a USB drive, disguised as a sample of event photos for inspiration. "Could you give this to Marcus? I'd love his input on some rustic designs." She agreed, unsuspecting. The drive held more than photos. It contained a Trojan, subtle but effective, coded to scrape his laptop's data the next time he plugged it in. I'd learned the trick years ago from a tech-savvy colleague. If it worked, I'd have everything: emails, photos, proof of their tangled lives. Driving back, I felt the first thrill of control. Claire wasn't my enemy, but she was a lever. Marcus and Emily had underestimated the quiet ones, the ones who watch and wait. That was their mistake. 2 days later, the Trojan paid off. My burner laptop pinged with a flood of files. Marcus's digital footprint, raw and unfiltered. Emails, texts, a calendar of meetups with Emily. There were photos too. Some innocent, others not, her laughter frozen in frames I'd never been part of. One email stuck out, sent to Emily a week ago. "Claire's gone till Friday. My place." Her reply, "Can't wait." My hands curled into fists, but I kept reading, dissecting. His life was a mess of contradictions. Love notes to Emily, apologies to Claire for working late, invoices for pottery sales that barely covered his bills. He was a parasite, feeding off both women, and Emily was complicit, reveling in it. I found a video too, buried in a folder. Them at his cabin, her voice soft as she said, "This feels like home. Home." The word twisted in me like a knife. I cross-checked dates. Every lie she'd told me matched his movements. The client dinners, the girls' weekends, all alibis for him. But there was more. A bank statement showed he'd been funneling money into a separate account. Small amounts, unnoticed by Claire. Emily's name popped up in a memo line. For E. She was funding him too, siphoning our savings into his hands. That night, she came home humming again, oblivious. I asked about her day, casual as ever, and she spun another tale about a glaze mishap. I nodded, poured her wine, and watched her sip it, her lips curling into that distracted smile. Inside, I was sketching the next phase, exposure, slow and deliberate, a crack widening until it swallowed them both. I started with something small, a test of the structure. Marcus had a gallery show coming up, a big one, his chance to make it as an artist. Emily had mentioned it in passing, excited for him, oblivious to my knowledge. I found the venue online, a trendy space in downtown Portland, all glass and white walls. The guest list was public, a mix of local art snobs and buyers. Perfect. Using an anonymous account, I sent the gallery owner a package. Inside was a curated selection from Marcus's files. Photos of him and Emily, intimate but not explicit, paired with screenshots of his gushing emails to her. I included a note. Thought you'd want to know who your star artist really is. Might spice up the show. No threats, no demands, just enough to rattle the cage. The show was Friday. I didn't go, but I watched the fallout unfold online. Posts trickled in. Confused attendees whispering about a display that wasn't pottery. Someone uploaded a grainy photo. One of my prints pinned to a wall, Marcus's arm around Emily, her face clear as day. The caption read, "Awkward vibes at Reed's exhibit." By midnight, the gallery's social media was a mess. Cancellations, snarky comments, a few defending Marcus as misunderstood. He'd survived, but the damage was done. His big night was tainted. Emily came home late, flustered. "The show was a disaster," she said, tossing her bag down. "Some idiot sabotaged it." I feigned concern. "How awful. What happened?" She waved it off, too rattled to elaborate, and retreated to the shower. I sipped my coffee, hiding a smirk. The first tremor had hit. The real quake was coming. The next day, Emily was on edge. She paced the kitchen, phone in hand, muttering about fixing things. I played dumb, asking if she was okay. "Just stress?" she snapped, then softened, kissing my forehead like an afterthought. I let her stew, knowing Marcus was scrambling too. His Instagram was silent, a stark contrast to his usual swagger. Claire, though, posted a cryptic update. A photo of wilted flowers, captioned, "Sometimes you prune what doesn't grow." I wondered if she'd seen the USB's contents yet. I upped the ante. Using Marcus's scraped data, I accessed his calendar. Another meetup planned at his cabin, tomorrow. Emily hadn't mentioned a trip, but I knew the script. She'd invent an excuse soon. I prepared my next move, a double play. First, I'd ensure Claire knew everything. Every photo, every lie. Second, I'd turn their sanctuary into a trap. That night, Lily asked why Mom seemed mad. I hugged her, said, "Grown-up stuff," and promised a stargazing night soon. She smiled, trusting me, and I felt the weight of my mission sharpen. Emily and Marcus thought they'd built something unbreakable. They were wrong. I'd dismantle it piece by piece, and they'd feel every fracture before the end. Sunday morning, Emily announced she was visiting a friend in the mountains. I didn't blink. "Have fun," I said, stirring my coffee, my voice flat as steel. She packed a bag, kissed Lily goodbye, and left, her car disappearing down the street. I waited 10 minutes, then loaded my truck, tools, a laptop, a burner phone. The cabin was an hour away, a secluded spot Marcus bragged about online. I'd mapped it from his posts, a blueprint forming in my mind. Claire was my first stop. I'd mailed her a package the day before, anonymously of course, containing every damning file from Marcus's laptop, plus a letter. "You deserve to know who he really is. Check his accounts." By now, she'd have it. I pictured her opening it, her world tilting as mine had. She wasn't my target, but she'd be my catalyst. I reached the cabin by noon, parking half a mile off and hiking in. It was rustic, all logs and glass, nestled among pines. Through the window, I saw them. Emily pouring wine, Marcus stoking a fire, their laughter drifting out. My chest tightened, but I stayed focused. I'd brought a small camera, motion-activated, and hid it in the eaves, angle to catch the living room. Evidence wasn't the goal anymore, it was leverage. Next, I tampered with the Jeep. A loosened fuel line, subtle but effective. By morning, it'd leak enough to strand them. I wanted them isolated, trapped in their little love nest when the walls closed in. Back home, I checked my laptop. Claire had posted again. A single word. Enough. The fuse was lit. Monday, Emily didn't call. I expected that. She texted Lily a vague, "I'll be home tomorrow." But I knew better. The camera feed streamed to my burner laptop. Grainy but clear, hours of them lounging, cooking, tangled in each other's arms. I watched just long enough to confirm they were still there, then shut it off. Disgust fueled me, but I stayed cold, methodical. Claire made her move that afternoon. A friend of Marcus's tagged him in a furious post. "Dude, what did you do?" "Claire's losing it." Attached was a screenshot, Claire's email to their shared accountant, demanding a freeze on all joint accounts. She'd found the hidden one, the one Emily had fed. I smiled grimly. Marcus's financial lifeline was cut. By evening, the camera caught their first fracture. Marcus paced, phone to his ear, voice rising. "She can't do this," he shouted. Emily tried to calm him, her hands on his shoulders, but he shook her off. "This is your mess too," he snapped. She flinched, and I saw it, the first crack in their facade. The Jeep wouldn't start. I'd made sure of that, and the nearest town was a 10-mile walk. They were stuck, and the pressure was building. I sent an anonymous tip to the gallery owner from the show. "Check Reed's cabin." More drama brewing. Word would spread. Their sanctuary was about to become a stage. Tuesday morning, the camera showed chaos. Marcus kicked a chair, cursing about Claire, while Emily sat on the couch, arms crossed, her face tight. "We'll figure it out," she said, but her voice wavered. He rounded on her. "With what money? She's got everything." The lover's glow was gone, replaced by desperation. I leaned back, savoring it. Claire escalated. She posted publicly, rare for her, a photo of a smashed face, one of Marcus's, captioned, "Some things break for good." Comments exploded, friends asking questions, others piecing it together from the gallery fiasco. Then a local art blog picked it up. Ceramicist Marcus Reed's personal life implodes. Affair rumors swirl. They named Emily, linking her studio's website. Her reputation, her art, everything she'd built. It was crumbling. At home, I kept my routine. Lily asked when Mom was back. "Soon." I lied, hating it. That night, I emailed Emily's biggest client, a gallery chain, using a spoofed address from her studio. Attached were photos from the cabin, time-stamped, with a note. "Thought you'd want to see where her focus really is." By morning, they dropped her, citing scheduling conflicts. Her career, her escape, was gone. Wednesday, the camera showed them unraveling. Marcus drank heavily, slurring accusations. "You pushed me into this," Emily cried, packing her bag. But with no car, no signal, she was trapped. I drove to the cabin, stopping just out of sight. I'd brought a megaphone, a petty touch, but effective. "Marcus Reed and Emily Carter," I boomed, my voice echoing through the trees. "Your lies are out. Claire knows. The art world knows. You're done." They stumbled outside, pale and panicked. Emily saw my truck, recognition dawning, and screamed my name. I didn't answer. I tossed a folder onto the dirt, copies of everything, bank records, emails, photos, and drove off. The camera caught the aftermath. Marcus shouting, Emily sobbing, their alliance shattering as they turned on each other. Back home, I filed for divorce, citing infidelity, and sent Emily the papers via courier to the cabin. Claire filed too. Her lawyer contacted me, piecing it together, and I gave her the rest of Marcus's financial dirt anonymously. His accounts were frozen, his career torched. Emily's studio lost its lease. Her landlord, a friend of a friend, got wind of the scandal. Their worlds imploded, piece by piece, just as I'd designed. A week later, Emily came home. She looked hollow, her hair limp, her eyes red. "How could you?" she whispered, standing in the kitchen. I didn't flinch. You built this, I said. I just pulled the pins. She begged to explain, but I cut her off. Lily's upstairs. Talk to her if you want. Then leave. She did, tears streaming, and I watched from the window as she drove away, her life in tatters. Marcus fared worse. Claire took the house, the savings, everything. His cabin was repossessed. Turns out he defaulted on payments, propped up by Emily's cash. The art community blacklisted him, whispers of toxic following his name. He vanished, last seen selling pots at a flea market, a shadow of his swagger. I kept the house, custody of Lily, and my silence. She asked about her mom once. I said, people make choices, and we stargazed instead. The revenge wasn't loud, but it was cruel. Every pillar of their lives razed, their love a pile of rubble. I'd engineered it perfectly, and as I sat in my workshop, sketching again, I felt the weight lift. The structure held. My daughter and I would rebuild.